And this is what I played for him.
Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Hello again, Mark here. Welcome to episode 9 of the Cuckoo Town podcast, Old School Supernatural. Before we go any further, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of you good people out there who are supporting my show, and hello to any new listeners. The previous episode with my friend Bob Osborne was a great success. My audience figures showed a big increase from earlier episodes. Thanks, Bob. Anyway, let's get on with today's show. I'm joined by 2 paranormal investigators, each of them with many decades worth of experience and expertise, Steve Cleaves and Mark Toombs from England's West Country. I first met these great lads in 2016 due to an invitation to join a paranormal investigation group that they were members of. The invitation had been sent to me by one of the founding members of that group, the late great Michael Williams, the Cornish writer, researcher and ghost hunter. Michael had been one of my major paranormal influences when I was a teenager. I've been a fan ever since. This episode is split into 2 parts. In the first part, I speak to Steve and Mark about their personal paranormal experiences and their memories of our mutual friend, the late Michael Williams. In the second part, there's an edited version of an interview that I did with Michael back in 2016 at his home on Bodmin Moor. A few days after that interview, Michael sent me an invitation to join his paranormal investigation group, a very select by invitation only group. I had obviously passed the test. I went on to attend many of his investigation days at locations all over Cornwall. One day, tired of me calling him Mr. Williams, he snapped, "We're friends now, Mark. Call me Michael." I was honoured then, and I will remain so. In 2019, Michael kindly wrote me a foreword for my Spirit of Cornwall, A Haunted Legacy books, something that I'll always be proud of. Sadly, shortly afterwards, Michael passed away, but my friendship with Steve and Mark has continued. Many of you listening, especially in the US or anywhere outside of the UK really, won't have heard of Michael. Indeed, many paranormal enthusiasts in the UK itself won't be aware of the tremendous research that he did from 1965 through to his death just a few years ago. This was largely due to Michael's modest manner. Although he did appear on British paranormal TV at least once, he was in the original Ghost Hunters documentaries, which were narrated by William Woolard. In my opinion, that was the best paranormal show that's ever been aired anywhere. Seek it out if you can. It's on YouTube. Michael's best friend was Peter Underwood, the researcher, author, who penned the classic A Gazetteer of British Ghosts. He was also a founding member of the Cornish-based Paranormal Investigations group, after he and Michael, along with Steve, had split from the London-centric ego-strewn Ghost Society. It's important, I feel, to get over to the younger paranormal generations and our US friends listening that we in the UK have always had our own paranormal shows and personalities. I, of course, loved some of the US paranormal personalities too, especially Brad Steiger. But in my world, and I'm sure in many other Brits of my generation too, the likes of Michael Williams, Peter Underwood, Professor Archie Roy Cleverly, the Reverend Lionel Fanthorpe, the Viking Vicar, Colin Wilson, Arthur Shuttlewood, and even Michael Aspel. These were our paranormal TV celebs. All these people were really too early to cash in on the huge interest in the paranormal of more recent years on satellite TV, the internet, and on paranormal podcasts. In fact, when I interviewed Michael back in 2016, he was probably into his 80s, and I had tried to explain podcasts to him. "Ah," he said, "we used to have those before TV came along, but we called it the wireless." Now, there are a few places and people and things that Michael in part 2 talks about which some listeners probably won't know about. So here are a few little notes to help you get the most out of this discussion. Michael and myself allude to an old legend about King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, rising from Bossini Mound, and strange lights, and Michael says, "Praise be to Beringord." So, here's a little context for that. Michael had, in 1965, the genesis of his interest in the supernatural. It's what got him going into this and what got him writing.
He had just bought a hotel at a tiny North Cornish hamlet called Bossiney. It's quite near Tintagel, where the castle is, if anyone knows that. It was directly opposite Bossiney Mound, which is like a large grassy hillock. It's not really a hill, it's just like a load of soil being chucked there and it's grown over grassy, but it's been there for centuries. And it's right alongside a Methodist chapel. Now, Michael had just read a book by Sabine Baring Gould. I think he was a vicar too, Reverend Sabine Baring Gould. He was a famous Cornish folklorist. One of the legends in Baring Gould's book referred to King Arthur rising from under that mound, Bossiney Mound, with his knights every Midsummer's Eve at 12 midnight. Now, Michael couldn't resist testing that legend back in 1965 on Midsummer Evening, but he got more than he bargained for. He saw anomalous lights in the chapel, lights that couldn't be explained, and he had witnesses to that as well. All of this comes out in the interview. You'll hear that in the interview. I should also point out that Bossiney, nearby Slaughter-Bridge, which was where there was a big battle with King Arthur, Tintagel, these are all places which are all very close to this Bossiney Mound, and they are all associated with King Arthur. Okay, moving on. We mention Hawker's Hut. R.S. Hawker, an eccentric vicar, a priest. R.S. stands for Robert Stephen. Now, he needs an episode of his own, really, and I'm going to do that at some point soon, hopefully. I believe Hawker was probably the coolest vicar ever, and the craziest too. During Michael's interview in part 2, he discusses some of his personal ghost sightings, but he also discusses several writers who he knew personally. Michael had several interests. He wasn't only into the paranormal. He was a writer himself, and he was influenced by these well-known writers. These included Derek Tangi, Dennis Vale Baker, James Turner, Wallace Nichols, Winston Graham, and Colin Wilson, and they all lived in Cornwall. I have discussed in episode 7 of Cuckoo Town how Cornwall attracts creative people to work there. There's something in the atmosphere, in the ground, in the granite. We don't really know. We're working on it. The next point I'd like to raise is many of the haunted locations mentioned by Steve, Mark and Michael are featured in my Spirit of Cornwall, a Haunted Legacy books. These can be purchased online via Amazon, as can many of Michael's excellent books, but they'll all be second-hand now because they're not available as new books. But you can find them, and they're well worth the effort in looking for them, especially Supernatural in Cornwall, which was first published, I believe, in about 74-75. Well worth reading. Next point. Michael discusses Poldark. This was the original BBC TV series. The books were originally written by Winston Graham. The actor who played the main character, Ross Poldark, his name was Robin Ellis, he stayed at Michael's place on Bodmin Moor, which was where I interviewed Michael. I was actually in the room where he stayed. And the link was that Michael Williams was his book agent back in 1975. And Michael also mentions Anne Harrad Rees. It's a Welsh name, Anne Harrad Rees. My daughter was named after her. She was a beautiful lady who played the part of Ross's partner, his girlfriend cum wife, in Poldark. Anyone who's watched Poldark will know who Demelza was. That was the name she played, Demelza. Anyway, I'm rambling on too much. I think and I hope that the rest of the interview is self-explanatory. If not, reach out. I'll try to help you out. Okay, enjoy. I began by asking Steve if he'd had any early paranormal experiences in his childhood and teenage years.
My first experience probably dates back to when I was about 5 or 6 years old at home, and I can remember having some very vivid dreams of being drawn up the staircase in our mum and dad's house upstairs by this unknown force. And as a youngster, you always get weird dreams anyway and nightmares, but this happened on many, many occasions. It's the same dream or same feeling, being dragged up the stairs by this unknown force, and I had nightmares for weeks with this, and it got so bad at times mum and dad had to sit with me at night time to actually get me to actually go to sleep. It was that bad.
Wow.
I never got to the bottom of it, never found out why it happened, or the house itself. I'd never had any ghosts in it that I'm aware of. My mum and dad and my brother, again, never had any problems at all with it. But I had that probably for about 4 or 5 months on a regular basis, every sort of 2 or 3 nights. Couldn't understand it, and at that age it was quite terrifying, to be honest. Also, my parents' house, actually had a cellar, and I absolutely hated going down into the cellar. It was well lit. There's only 3 rooms in there, all well lit, but back room was the worst I hated, and I don't know why. Never saw anything in there at all. Never had any problems or any apparitions, so to speak. It was just a horrible dread of going in that far back room. It frightened me to death. It really did.
Was it a new house to your parents? There's somebody there before?
There was somebody there before. I bought the house in, I think it was around about 1949, I think it was roughly. Who was there before? I don't know, to be honest. I have no idea. It's an old house, probably about 110 years old now. But again, it's on a main road. Nothing. Before the house was built there, it was an old rubbish tip. So as far as we're aware, there's no other houses there beforehand or any other property. It was just a wasteland and filled with rubbish. Because when Dad was digging the garden, often you find bits of old bottles and stuff in the garden, old bedsteads and stuff. So yeah, it was weird. And that was my first experience anyway.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was something happening in the house which sort of left its imprint. And
it's possible,
you picked up on it, yeah.
But now you mention that, I will actually ask my mum and ask her if she knows anything about it at all. Because funny enough, I never ever mentioned it because my parents were very, not dismissive of the idea, but they were never sort of believed in ghosts or the paranormal. To them, ghosts, it was just nothing to worry about. It didn't exist.
Did you actually see any ghosts at any time? Or
not in the house itself, but my first ghost experience was when I was working part-time down the local co-op in Radstock years ago, and that place was renowned to be haunted. And again, being there myself for a few years, you thought, well, there's nothing of it at all. But then one night, 2 of us were in the store working late, and we saw a figure walking down one of the warehouse corridors. It looked like a man in like a Victorian costume, top hat, or sort of, I'll say top hat, like a tallish hat, black and white figure, and he's walked down the aisle of the warehouse and disappeared through a back wall. And that was my first real ghost I actually saw.
How did that affect you? Did you just take it in your stride?
Yeah, at the time it was like, what the hell was that? Did we see what we really saw? 2 of us actually saw it at the same time, which is unusual for seeing ghosts. We just sort of dismissed it initially, but then I think when you were there working late by yourself, your mind then tends to play tricks on you, and you then begin to worry more about what are those strange noises, the creaks, the bumps. Is it just the wind? Is it just doors slamming shut by themselves, or is it someone else around there?
I then asked Mark the same question.
Parents were farmers, so we lived in an old farmhouse. It was a creepy place anyway. I mean, the place was old. You had a few you get a sort of shiver down your spine, or what's that in the, when my parents moved from that house, and I grown up and moved myself, Dad told me that someone committed suicide in the house.
At what point did you 2 guys join Michael Williams's paranormal group?
Well, we joined the Ghost Club Society first. Well, Steve joined first before me, and then Steve said, "Oh, why don't you come along?" And we went to the Battler's Edge site, wasn't it? I went. My first ghost was down at Pengersick Castle in Cornwall, which I found that was a really odd place to go to. It's one of those places, it's real atmosphere there.
It just gives you the old tingle up the spine.
Yeah.
So you saw a ghost at Pengersick Castle?
No, just I get like a gut feeling. I can picture it in my mind, things like I work off of people. When people like doing pendulum and things like that, I tend to tune into people, and I get these not like voices, but these thoughts come into my mind, and that's how I think there's something around,
Yeah, and does the evidence that's collected by other people, does it tally with the thoughts that you're getting?
More or less, yeah.
I asked Mark what his immediate memories were of the late Michael Williams, supernatural researcher, writer, and investigator.
I met him at Pengersick Castle, the first time. He was just mind of information, a true gent. He knew his stuff, and he just talked through the history of things. I was in awe by him, really, in some respect.
Me too.
Yeah.
And you, Steve, was it the same with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Gentleman, always welcoming, made you feel part of the team, kind, sincere. He knew his subject very well, and together with him and Peter Underwood, they were formidable.
So did Peter Underwood come along on the investigations?
Yes, he did. Yeah, and Peter himself it sounds a bit odd, but he had a very large presence, but he didn't overtake things. He didn't sort of take over. He stayed in the background, offered his advice, tips, hints. Both of them always turned out impeccably dressed every time. And the tweed jacket.
I always felt scruffy when I was around him. I always
club.
Yeah. But I read his books when I was younger. Supernatural in Cornwall was my favourite.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I love that one. There's some wonderful experiences in there. And obviously he did loads and loads of others. And I used to read all those, never once imagining that one day I'd actually meet him. I think I found out Michael lived nearby. because I was in Bude.
Right.
And he was in...
St. Teth, wasn't it?
And on the Bodmin Moor. And I contacted him because I thought it'd be great to interview him. And he invited me along to his house. He had this, you probably went there, but he had this lovely little office in the garden, didn't he?
That's right, yeah, his garden shed, yeah.
And his library was amazing. Just my eyes were just constantly scanning his books when he was talking to me. I was trying not to be rude, but I was just looking at all the titles. And occasionally he'd note, yes, this book is a first edition. It's signed by my friend Colin. And he knew all these people that were like my heroes, like Colin Wilson.
That's right, yeah, absolutely.
He knew them as first name terms. And that was the first interview I ever did. At one point during the interview, I'd sort of run out of ideas of what to ask. And he sort of picked up on it really quickly. He asked himself a question. But he did it so smoothly. I think I know what you're going to ask me. You were going to ask me, because he had that really deep, posh voice, didn't he?
That's right, yeah, absolutely.
And he just asked a great question. And then he was off again, and I was like, oh, thank God for that, And I wasn't able to play that audio for a long time because I'd got the settings incorrect.
Right.
And it was always a struggle to hear it. Only probably a few months ago, when I was looking into doing a podcast, I found Audacity, the audio hardware. I was fiddling around on there, and I thought, I got Michael's interview somewhere, and I found it. I can remember going to a pub in Camelford in Cornwall. He sort of did his normal sort of introductory piece about the history of the place and everything. And then we was, there's a whole group of us sat around, maybe 20 of us. I know you guys were both out. We were having a little bit of a giggle about something. And he was a schoolmaster, wasn't he, in his early days?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, and he turned around and he told us to basically shut but in a polite way, because it was Michael. And turned around, told us off, and I felt like about 12 again, He was great.
I could say that Elaine Beckton was his secretary. Used to call him Captain Mannering.
Oh, right.
Because there is a resemblance. If you ever watched Dad's Army,
I'm their appointed commander, Captain Mannering, and I must ask you to keep your hands off my privates.
Wonderful program.
But yeah, he loved his cricket. Yeah, with the local cricket team at Camelford, I think, to carry that bell, wasn't it, in his briefcase? Yeah, that was something to do with the cricket.
I think that was from Taunton Cricket Club. I think when he passed on, they gave the bell back to Taunton Cricket Club as a memorial of Michael's support, because he always carried that bell with him. Every time we went out on our ghost nights and our meetings, he carried the bell to ensure we complied and we were paying attention. He would ring it.
Of all the places you've investigated in, say, Cornwall, for example, because, that's like the major focus, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
Where would you say was the most interesting? Jamaica maybe?
Jamaica to a certain degree, although I think it's been very much now over-commercialised.
Right.
But I think for myself, though, Davis Day Airfield, that's my favourite place. Yeah, we had a lot of activity there. I know Maggie and Elaine and myself and Mark spent a few nights there on several occasions, and we actually picked up Morse code in one of the bunkers.
Interesting.
Which was really strange. And also, when we were taking pictures in there, our cameras stopped working about halfway down the bunker.
Right.
They just would not take a picture. You step back 2 paces, they'd work. Come forward again 2 paces. Very strange, yeah.
Just for listeners, the Morse code at Davidstow Air Base would have been the Royal Air Force.
No, at the time there, we heard nothing ourselves, but when we played back our audio recording, clearly, Morse code.
That often happens, doesn't it? And it works the other way as well, doesn't it? Like, you can hear something and it doesn't get picked up.
That's right, yeah.
The other way. What about the King's Head?
Algernon, yes.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that base. That was cool.
Yeah, we've spent many a happy night there, drinking a few bottles of fine wine. But no, certainly with that one, we found that we had a few issues there where in the haunted bedroom, we put audio recording devices in 3 of the bedrooms and in the hallway. And in the haunted bedroom, the microphone there picked up footsteps and the sound of like a door latch going. But the other 3 picked up nothing at all. Yet, if anybody went to use the communal bathroom middle of the night, all the microphones picked up everything. Yet, when we heard noises in the haunted bedroom, only that one microphone picked up the noises.
That is odd, isn't it?
It was odd, yeah. That was one there. But I know since it's been renovated there now, they've now got their own bathrooms now. It's all been changed from 4 rooms into 3 rooms, I think it was, wasn't it, Mark? I know we stayed there a few years ago now, but in the room that we were in, we literally were just put lights out, going to sleep, and we heard this bell ding out. Mm-hmm. So what the hell was that? It was so loud and clear. Put lights back on again, nothing in the room at all. Was again? No idea. Absolutely strange that was, yeah. But so we spent many happy hours in that place over the years, I must admit.
Well, I mean, you were sort of a bit spoilt for choice, weren't you, in Cornwall, really, with places?
Yeah.
But did you go anywhere where you were surprised, like, how can I put it, like, didn't have a reputation at all, but then you had a lot of activity?
Trying to think now, there's so many places we've been to.
Hawker's Hut. I wrote about that in my Cornish book. I gathered so many stories from people about that place. I'm sure you've been in the hut and sat in there. And
we have, yeah.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing place,
Yeah, for anyone listening, it's a hut built out of old shipwreck timbers on the side of a cliff, very high up, 200-300 foot up, maybe, something like that.
Probably, yeah, it's just high, yeah.
It's just exposed to everything, and it's just a wonderful place just to sit. I went in there with my daughter. This is going back now probably, 2016, 17, and I took a recorder in there, and I basically just sat there with my daughter, and my daughter's sort of quite open to this stuff, but she looked at me like I was crazy, even despite that. And I was just actually speaking to the Reverend Horace Hawker as if he was there, and I was sort of saying, well, thank you for letting us sit in your hut, and he's probably been dead for 150 years or more, but I was thanking him for letting us stay there, and I asked him, do you come here and smoke opium and chill out? Because I know he did, didn't he? Smoked opium. I, like you were saying just now, I never heard anything. We didn't hear any voices or anything. There was no one near us. We were, what it's like on that cliff. Like, we know there was no one around. When I played it back, there was a distant voice, like as if he was responding.
Right.
Like a man's voice responding. Like, I can't remember. It was quite a simple response. It was something like, I'd have to listen to it again if I could find it, but it was just like he directly answered a question. The timing was like perfect. And, as I say, we didn't hear that when we were, I just thought, it's just a bit of fun, But when I played it back later, it was on there. Another one of the stories I heard, which I really loved, was in the graveyard of Hawker's Church, the wreck of the Caledonia, the figurehead on the front.
That's right, yeah.
The girl with a beret on.
That's right.
Well, supposedly, I think this is like in the 80s or sometime around then, somebody thought it'd be a great idea to steal it, and they put it in a van, and they were driving away, and they found it. I think it was a reward went out to try and track this thing down, and they found it in a field on the A39 that follows the coast all the way up, and they found it only a mile or so northeast of Morwenstow. So they whoever took it hadn't got very far, and at some point they decided, we're going to get rid of this. And it just made me wonder whether there was some sort of pressure put on them by people connect to that figurehead. I'm talking supernatural connection, like maybe crew members or something. The crew members are buried in that churchyard.
That's right, yeah.
And it just made me wonder, in my imaginative mind, maybe the guy was driving away, thinking he'd found something of value that he could flog to an antique shop or something, and maybe something appeared to him alongside him, and some 17th century sailor said, better put that back. Who knows? We'll never know. But it was interesting. I mean, like, if you've gone to that trouble to steal something, surely you just carry on with whatever you plan to do. You wouldn't abandon it in a field, would you? Peter Underwood, you mentioned earlier, he was definitely one of my childhood heroes, if you like. He wrote the Gazetteer of British Ghosts.
That's right, yeah.
I had that. Then there was Michael Williams, as we mentioned. He did Supernatural in Cornwall, and he had every imaginable title on paranormal and supernatural. He always called it a supernatural, didn't he? Because he was from that era.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we did, didn't we? I mean, when I was young, it was always a supernatural. He was like a big star to me. He was like, he was one of a big name. He was right up there alongside all these people that we get, like I say, if you're watching American shows, they'll bang on about these people, and you think, yeah, but what about Michael Williams? But because they won't know him.
No.
But he was a massive influence on us.
Very, yeah.
He was like I'm just trying to think of anyone who would sort of compete with him in England. Is there anyone? I mean, Peter Underwood would be one.
Yeah, Peter Underwood was more, I think, well known than Michael, but then Michael was he was a very private person as well, though.
Yeah, he was modest as well, wasn't he?
Very, very modest, yeah. He did He just enjoyed history of the places, meeting the people, and again with him and Peter together, they were a formidable force, and I very much underrated.
Definitely.
They weren't there for the limelight, the prestige, nothing at all.
No.
It was just purely research, and they shared their adventures and their stories with people like us who enjoyed listening to them and relate to them as well. They were very wonderful people.
They were.
And very sadly missed. Like Mark and myself, we read about Peter Underwood many years ago when we were growing up, and to actually meet the guy face to face, it was you felt very sort of
humbled,
humbled, excited, present, but they put you at their ease every time.
This sort of old-fashioned term like gentleman, it doesn't exist now, does it really? It's like who would you say is a gentleman now? Is probably no one really. What's the name of that pub near Dartmoor we went to where they had a cave in it? You remember that one?
A cave?
Yeah, it had like a cave in it. It was on the edge of Dartmoor in Devon. Well, it was almost in Cornwall.
Do you mean the highwayman?
Yes, Sowerton.
Sowerton, that's right, Sowerton, the highwayman. That's right, yeah.
I think that might have been the first one he invited me to, possibly. He invited me to dinner with his friends, which is you and Mark and Elaine Beck-Turner and all the rest of them. But I turned up sort of not knowing really what to expect. He liked to move people around to sit with different people, didn't he?
That's right, yeah, absolutely.
So that they would learn new things from new people and make new friends. And he put me with these older ladies who I didn't have a clue who they were, and he just introduced me to them. And one of them was, and I can never remember fully, but I think one of them was Colin Wilson's secretary.
That's right, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought when she started, she kept talking about Colin, and Colin did this and Colin did that. And I think, who's Colin? And so I think the other lady with me sort of said, that's Colin Wilson, and it's like, what? Colin Wilson? You were his secretary? And
Michael used to write in the Cornish Guardian every week. I think he had a good following with his stories and things he used to write.
Yeah, he was really good. On a Saturday, wasn't it?
That's right, that's it, yeah.
Yes, I think that's the only reason I bought that paper was because Michael was in it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think a lot of people did, I'm not sure. But,
he had like a whole page in there. Because he wrote about, as we said, he wasn't just into the paranormal, but every now and again he would indulge himself and do a bit on the paranormal.
That's right, he would, yeah. And people would write to him, I think, as well, but their stories, that's how he got his, how he got to write his books and that with people.
So here's part 2, the interview that I referred to in part 1, the interview that I recorded back in 2016 with the British paranormal researcher, investigator and writer, Michael Williams.
I've no regrets about living here. I've always loved moorland, and you've got Bodmin Moor on your doorstep, and on the other side you've got this marvellous coastline. Down there I tended to favour the coastline from St Ives to Land's End. I think that Zena area is among the most marvellous miles anywhere in the whole country. And of course here too you've got quite a paranormal reputation. Not that they're without a share of ghosts in Penwith, but I think probably more thickly populated in this area. I didn't get into ghosts really until Midsummer Eve 1965, with Sonia and I, our first year at Bossini. That's the interesting point. A lot of people are unsure about their genesis, but I can say to you that it was something which happened, and I've written about it in Supernatural.
Was this the light in the window?
Yes. Of the chapel. And that was the beginning point. But for Baring Gould writing about King Arthur's Round Table, supposed to lie beneath Bossini Mound, and comes to the surface on Midsummer Eve. And I was very annoyed that 3 other people joined me. We were then running Bossini House Hotel. And in retrospect, I was very glad they did, because 2 of them actually saw the lights. The young girl was too frightened to look. And that was conclusive proof that it was not my imagination, that something unusual was happening. And the behaviour of the terrier, Tech, a very courageous dog, he refused to go anywhere near the chapel when we went to explore. So that was the very precise beginning. And from then on, I won't say it's become an obsession because I'm interested in too many other things. Cricket's my big game. The theatre. So I'm not just a one-track mind. No. Animal welfare. I still do a lot on animal welfare behind the scenes. I'm rather a sort of Catholic, people call me, not in religious sense. I do have quite wide interests. Turning point, the beginning, the real heart of the whole thing was that experience at Bossini. Praise be to Berengu. Man in many parts. He was an author, squire, parson.
Was he a little bit like Corker, a similar sort of character?
Yes, he was a more aristocratic figure than Corker. Had a lot more money. Lou Trenchard, if you haven't been to it, is one of the great experiences of the West Country. It was his mansion and rectory, which he designed himself.
I asked Michael if he had been to grammar school.
No, I didn't. I went to the last uneducated pupil. I went, it was during the war when education was hit or miss. My parents had sent me to one of the last dame schools in Penzance, where I didn't learn a great deal. I had the good fortune to be given tuition by a lady called Mabel Williams, my great aunt, and they suddenly realised that I knew next to nothing, and so I had this wonderful personal tuition, and I didn't go to college or anything like that, for I was due to go into the army, national service in those days. My overseas posting, which was Bristol.
Could you talk a little bit about Winston Graham?
Yes. I only met him on 2 occasions, but we corresponded quite a lot. Right, most of his books.
Yes, I noticed that.
Winston Graham. Yeah. He was a delightful man. His Poldark novels, I think, will be read forever. I got to know quite a lot about him. He was really like a detective. You felt that he stored things away very well. And then I heard him speak when he came down near the end of his life at the Fy Festival, the Du Maurier Festival, and he was magnificent. And I had a chat for half an hour with him after that. And those were our only 2 meetings, but he was a big influence in that I responded to his writing, and he very generously allowed me to publish 2 titles on Poldark when it was a raging success. Indeed, Robin Ellis stayed in our cottage here, and I think we sold more books that day than we did in any other signing session in a quarter of a century of regional publishing.
I like the story about De Melza.
Yes.
Where all the old chaps came over and it was an excuse to speak to her.
Speak to her, yes. I met her too. When his memoirs came out, sadly he didn't live to see them published. He died shortly before. And Christopher Biggins was there. He said, when she comes... this was at the Royal Institution of Cornwall. He said, I'll introduce you. And I can still see her coming up that wonderful staircase, Truro. And he said, this is Michael Williams, who is a big fan of yours and an influential man in Cornwall, which was totally untrue. I shook her by the hand and said, I've been warned that you should never meet your heroines. But I said, this is a magical moment. What a charming man you are, Michael Williams, she said. But I really meant it. And her early death was a tragic business.
Awful.
Tragic.
After a short break, I restarted the conversation by asking Michael about Derek Tangi, the famous author of the Minack Chronicles.
Derek Tangi, he was an enormous motivator. I went to interview him one Friday afternoon. I was then doing articles on writers for the Cornishman.
Right.
And this was when teaching at St Albans School. I wrote to him and said, I'd like to come and interview you. And he replied back saying, yes, I'm delighted you would come. On the understanding that I can read what you've written. Because he said, I find that many people with the best will in the world will not get something right, and therefore... you're irritated by it, or even you upset readers by this slight innocent error.
Yes.
So with some trepidation, I went over to Minack, and he was charming, and Jean, his beautiful wife, was a delight. And it was one of those rare instances of where a friendship was forged out of an interview. He became a kind of mentor, and I sent my article on him in longhand, and I was only learning to type, and I remember him. I had stayed down at Lamorna. I said, I'm down in Lamorna. I was taken down to the Lamorna Cove Hotel the following weekend, and he said, come over and I'll tell you any amendments. And I went, and he opened a bottle of wine, and he hadn't altered a comma. So I took that as quite a vote of confidence. Yes, it was a magical place. It didn't belong to him. It was owned by Lord Falmouth, who leased it to him.
Right.
But he was a terrific man, and a very big influence on my life.
They were socialites as well, weren't they, up in London?
Yes, there were two sides to them. They liked solitude, and they loved being with their animals, but now and then they were very pleased to take part in some social gathering.
Yes.
Provided it was big enough and attractive enough. You know.
Right.
And of course he went up to London when books were launched and stayed at the Savoy, where she'd been public relations officer. And later, when she died, he stayed at Claridge's. So he had a man who had certain standards, and he'd served in MI5. Yes, he was brought up at Porth, Glendorgal, and went to Harrow, where he was not a success at all. And then when the war came, he joined the DCLI, and then was conscripted into MI5. I said to him one day, why don't you write more about your MI5 days? Well, he said, when you join MI5, you'll sign a sort of secrets clause. And he said, but I'll take your advice, and I'll try and weave in bits here and there that won't upset people. You know, as a result of that conversation, he wrote about Anthony Blunt and so on, and how he met McLean. I think he was a double agent, actually, because when he died, some years after he died, the Russians said that he was a Russian spy. I don't believe that for one moment. He was British and Cornish to the backbone. The Test match at Lord's and Wimbledon tennis were things that he followed avidly, and he was a great royalist. I think he may well have been used by MI5 to have had some dealings with the Russians, and that he fed them some innocuous information and got something better in return. Because he told me, certain things which made me think that he could have sailed near the wind in the call of duty, in nature of duty, not in any way of country. He wouldn't have betrayed this country at all, in my opinion. But big influence. He encouraged me to add colour to my writing, use the weather, use the scenery. And I was fortunate with another man called Wallace Nichols, who was a lesser-known writer, came from London, settled in Penzance. His wife was the curator at the Newlyn Art Gallery. And I interviewed him, and again, it was one of those meetings that developed into a friendship. And he did really become my unpaid tutor as a writer. But Wallace gave me encouragement as well. He and Derek, in their very different ways, were big influences, and they were totally different men, which was good. He read something in mine, and he said, "It's very good." But he said, "I think you ought to pay just a bit more attention to your verbs."
Is this the man who said the man ambled across the lawn?
Oh my gosh, you read some of the stuff. All right, yes. Yes, and he said...
I tried to think of it.
Yes, ambled across the lawn, and the colonel came striding into the room. Striding and ambling. He said, really tell you a great deal about them. And
he tells you their character before they've been introduced.
I feel that I was a very fortunate young man to have had the influence of such people. A third influence was Charles Simpson, painter and writer. I always say that he was my landscape mentor. Indeed, I often feel he's not very far from me when I'm out of Bodmin Moor. We went down, Paranormal Investigation, that's the group of which I'm president. Yeah. We went down to the Broomfield Horse Sanctuary, near St. Just, put it that way.
Right.
During the course of the investigation, when the mediums got to work trying to find out any spirits about the place and so on, and I was aware of somebody behind my back. I was sitting on my shooting stick, and there was nobody there. And I was so aware of this presence that I moved my shooting stick a few paces to the left, and I found that the presence had moved again slightly to my left. And of course it came to me in a flash that Charles Simpson had, although I'd always loved horses, he was a friend of Munning's and painted horses, and very much like Tanguy and Nichols was an influence. Not so much not necessarily as a writing sense, but making me aware of the landscape, because he painted it so beautifully. And I'm sure that he had returned that day because he loved the Zena to St. Just coastline. He increased my knowledge of horses, and I'm sure that he had paid a return visit, as I had paid a return visit that day, to my roots.
Our conversation turned to Dennis Baker, the famous author who had lived in St. Ives for a few years.
I got the impression he was a little bit more bohemian than all these other characters we've been talking about.
Yes, he was. That is the right word. He and Arthur Caddick were two. Caddick was the poet laureate of Cornish inns, and they were two bohemians, there's no two ways about it. Dennis was very good to me in that when he was running the second innings of the Cornish Review, he allowed me to write, and it was due to that I met James Turner, then living at St. Death, and it was due to James Turner that we came to live here in the short term while we looked for something bigger and better. And that was in 1975-76. And here we are, 2016, and we're still here. So Dennis gave me opportunities, and we had the occasional meal together, but he did give me a great writing opportunity. His wife was a very creative woman too, was a potter, and I remember attending his funeral, and they had no vicar. It was a crematorium at Truro. They did the funeral themselves, the family acted as bearers. It was a very moving service. There were readings from his work, and members of the family talked about it. A very gifted, I go as far as to say he's probably one of the best, if not the best, short story writer to come out of Cornwall. Winston Graham was equal, and if not better, but Winston was of a different style, really. Dennis never climbed the heights that Winston did. But they were two of the best short story writers that I had the luck to meet. So I'm very indebted to them.
Our conversation turned back to Colin Wilson and Peter Underwood.
I think his death has been... I think the deaths of Colin Wilson and Peter Underwood in rapid succession have been massive blows to the paranormal. But there is no doubt that those two men did an enormous amount. Colin, arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, paranormal writer in the history of the subject. And Peter, a very fine writer and researcher in the field. In fact, doubt if anybody else had done the investigations in the field that he had done. And we were very proud of the fact that his very last investigation was with our group Paranormal. He became our patron. And on his last visit to Cornwall, like October, I think, 2 years ago, he came with us to Morwenstow when we made contact with the spirit of Robert Stephen. But they were huge contributors to the subject.
Have you seen many apparitions?
Yes, I suppose I've heard more than I've seen, actually. We had a cottage attached to the hotel at Bossini, and we had footsteps there with great regularity. In fact, someone thought it was me coming into the cottage when she was resting in the afternoon. I said, I haven't been anywhere near the cottage. I've been in the office of the hotel. And oddly enough, last Saturday, we were at the Farley Sheaf at Goran Church Town, and I let the group go ahead, and because I was talking to waitress and thanking her for how well she looked after us over lunch, and I therefore went upstairs on my own. The group had gone ahead, and I realised that I wasn't walking alone. The light footsteps of a young woman, I'm practically certain, were on my right, on my good ear, and she was just one step ahead of me on the staircase. So these things do happen. Being aware of unseen Charles Simpson last January and this March, clearly hearing footsteps, female light footsteps.
So you have a very strong sort of clairaudient, probably.
I don't know what it is. Yeah. And I've seen a few things, not a lot. My most spectacular was the sighting of a very elegant lady at Pengazic Castle, which I've written about, and I also saw, and that experience was shared by several other people with the old Ghost Club Society, which is now folded, saw this man in the small bar, I think it's called Mary's Bar, Jamaica Inn, and what was very interesting is that we did it in a dark session when all lights were out. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. And he was sitting in a corner on a bench, and he was like a watercolour, whereas the lady down at Pengazic was as real as you or me.
Yes.
He was like watercolour painting that had begun to fade.
Yes.
And when we put the lights back on, there was a huge coal scuttle between me and the man, and it wasn't there when I was looking at him.
No.
And there wasn't a bench where he was sitting. So it was a genuine time slip. So I've had a few instances. As I say, several sounds. If you put the sounds and the sightings together, I suppose they come to about 15. But I've only seen just the odd sighting. Those lights at Bosini were very, very impressive, and with the introduction to the whole thing, I should say. So have I given you...
Oh, it's fantastic, yeah.
I should in a minute want to go and see some rugby, so do you mind if we skip afternoon tea?
Yeah, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. I think we covered just about everything on my list. So, thank you very much. I appreciate you giving up your time to
That's right, it's a great pleasure. Wish you luck with your project.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Cuckoo Town, a Leviathan Media production, copyright Mark Anthony Wyatt 2022. If you've enjoyed the show, subscribe, like, share, and please do tell your like-minded friends about Cuckoo Town. You can find us on all the major platforms, and we'll be on YouTube too. I'll see you next time then, when we'll take another stroll together down a road less travelled. Bye for now. Be lucky.
Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Jack of diamonds, you're the meanest heart I know. Well, you up my poor pockets, my silver and gold. I'm going up on a mountain, gonna build me a whiskey still, and I'll sell you one bottle for a $20 bill. Going up on a mountain, gonna stand there looking down, so I can see my pretty baby whenever she comes around. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, and she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird. She warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July.
She's dead, wrapped in plastic.